Good evening, America. My name's Brandon, and this is Live with Project Sanity. I know you missed me last week. I was gone. I missed you too. And tonight we have a great show in store for you. I'm joined by my co-host Dave Conan, as always. The indubitable. Is that the right word?
Indubitable, good. I'll take indubitable.
Those SAT words have left me in my old age. America. But my name's Brandon, and this is Don't look it up. Don't look it up. Yeah, but like I was saying, we have a great show planned for you tonight. We have a guest joining us, a county commissioner candidate for in the state of Washington. We're going to learn a lot about that. We're going to learn what county commissioner means, because I do not know, and I'm sure a lot of our guests don't know either. But I'm sure it's very important. I'm 100% sure it's something that I should know right now. What else we got planned for them, Dave?
Well, we're going to get into a couple of things tonight after our interview with Kelsey, and we're going to talk about the DAPL protests, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and we're also going to get into a little bit about 9/11 and sort of preview maybe what we're going to have a longer topical discussion on Sunday, the anniversary, 15 years since the crime on America. And so that's kind of what we have up in store. And this, of course, we've sort of hijacked the show, if you will, not to be politically incorrect. But today is Richard Green's birthday. We're going to out him again, and he's got the day off, and we're going to control Project Sanity again today for the show. And it's going to be a great one. It's going to be a lot of fun, great discussion, as it always is, Brandon.
Absolutely.
As always is.
It's going to be a great discussion. We just outed Richard Green's birthday, just like Daily Beast outed all those Olympians. Was Daily Beast? That was Daily Beast. I want to say it was Daily Beast. Speaking of politically incorrect jokes about 9/11, since you just used the word hijack and 9/11 in the exact same breath, is 15 years too early to make? It's like a decade and a half. Is it too early to make a 7/11 joke in relation to 9/11?
Let's bring in the rest of our panel here for this very important question.
Are you trying to talk about Slurpees, Brandon? What is that? I don't get it.
Eric Miller.
I was actually going to go with the Beyonce song 7/11, but that's another good one.
Seriously, come on. I feel like this is a topic that's best broached by South Park.
New season starts next week.
Playing the AIDS. I think we leave this for them. I don't think this is our arena, guys.
My point is that there's no correct way to broach a topic, so you might as well go as far wrong as possible. And if we're going to talk about the tragedy of 9/11 and the impact of its impact on American politics and culture and geopolitical politics over the past, politics around the globe over the past decade and a half. But fine, I apologize if you're all going to get upset.
Well, save it for Two Black Dudes, TBD, your next podcast. We're waiting for number 3, Brandon. So
fine. Okay, fine. Let's go to the news before I get a lot of angry, emails about my insensitivity. I'm very sensitive. So it's been a busy week, Dave.
It's been it's always a busy news week these days. Things are really speeding up. Things are speeding up in the world. So just a couple of the things that caught my eye here in the news this week, and some of the things that we're talking about on the show today. And you can follow me, of course, over on Our Revolution TV on Twitter. And I am looking for a new logo, folks. So putting it out there, I need a new logo. I had my Feel the Burn logo up there before. And, we need to move on. So I'm going to work out a new logo for my show, for my site. So anyway, I'm at Twitter at Our Revolution TV, and of course on YouTube, ourrevolution.tv. But some of the stuff that caught my eye in the news this week, the largest strike, probably the largest strike in history, happened in India this week, where tens of millions of people in the public sector took to the streets and basically shut everything down. And nothing was mentioned in the mainstream media about this. On Labor Day even, nothing. And basically it was for a minimum wage of around $271 a month. So that's one of the items that the mainstream media definitely missed on Labor Day this week when Bernie Sanders came out in support on the stump for Hillary Clinton, salt in the wound. Another thing in the news, I don't know if you've heard this, but one of the lead organizers of the protests in Ferguson in Missouri after the Michael Brown shooting, he was found murdered what they're thinking is murder, shot in a burned-out car, but no witnesses and no evidence, no suspects as of right now, as far as we know. Also in other gun news, the survivors of the Aurora massacre have to pay $700,000 in legal fees because they lost their case. They sued the theater for security, lack of security for the shooting. The judge wanted them to arbitrate, and they didn't, and they lost. And so now the judge says they can ask for their money back for the cost of the suit. So they're being asked to pay $700,000. Eric found that little tidbit. Thank you, Eric. And moving on to national news, and of course we have the anniversary coming up of September 11th, and we're going to talk a little bit about it today, maybe get more into it on Sunday at some point. But this at the end of the month here in August, President Obama extended the state of emergency that has existed for the last 15 years and put into law on September 14th. I don't know if you guys feel the emergency that we're in, but apparently we're still in one. And it basically reads, because the terrorist threat continues, the national emergency declared on September 14th, 2001, and the powers and authorities adopted to deal with the emergency must continue in effect for an additional year. The national emergency that was declared on September 14th, 2001 with respect to the terrorist threat. So feel safe. We have extended the threat. Everybody's watching. They're watching for the next one. Don't worry. I find it interesting that the Congress is supposed to vote on this. There's another law. I forget the name of it. But the Congress is supposed to vote on these to see if there is actually a state of emergency. And they have never done it every year that it's been extended. So this is our shadow government in control of the police state. Right along that topic, we have the Pentagon in August put out $331 billion in contracts to 321 individual companies, individual contracts, $31 billion just for the month of August. They put out a nice little list of every day the contracts that they put out, and you can see some of the wonderful items on this list. This is foreign military spending here, uninhabited vehicle craft, that's the drone program. I think AT&T is getting $400 million for something. So this is all part of it, folks. This is, Donald Trump. He's on board. He wants us to increase our spending. He wants NATO increase their spending to 2% of their GDP. The military-industrial complex is in full control. And if our spending of military to GDP drops again next year, watch out. And then, of course, with presidential thought in mind,
do if you were elected about Aleppo.
About
Aleppo.
And what is Aleppo?
What is Aleppo? That was the quote for Gary Johnson this morning on Morning Joe, interviewed. Finally, Gary Johnson gets a chance to be interviewed on the mainstream media, Morning Joe, and he blows it big time. So this quite possibly has ended any chance for a third party to get anywhere near the presidency this year. So I found that interesting. Moving on to and some news in the Dakota Access Pipeline, which we're going to be talking about in the deep dive later. We have, this is the lovely little, this is the website here for Dakota Access. That's the 1,172-mile pipeline. And Bill McKibben just put out an op-ed in the LA Times asking Hillary Clinton to make a statement and take a stand on the Dakota Access Pipeline. So we'll see if that happens. We know Jill Stein was down there graffitiing the bulldozers and getting arrested, as I predicted last week in our little group. A PR stunt that we are all talking about, and quite honestly, it is a PR stunt. And we can talk about that a little bit on the other side of the news, maybe, guys. And also, the National Guard is being called out in North Dakota because the ruling is coming down tomorrow on the judge is going to decide whether or not this construction can continue or the injunction is going to stay put. So the National Guard is ready for anything. They were hoping not for violence, of course. And just on a side note, of course, the big story this week with the protesters and the nations that have been arriving, the thousands of people of different nations around the country, natives, original nations, original Americans, they're being attacked by corporate private security attack dogs by the shadowy global security firm known as G4S. Now, G4S is one of the largest private security firms. It's not the only private security firm there at Dakota, but it is one of the largest in the world. They're a UK-based company. They handle our deportation prisons. They handle security in Israel. They handle security all over the world. And just interestingly enough, to see how far these guys reach, if this name sounds familiar at all, it is the security firm that the Orlando shooter Mateen worked for 4 years prior to the Orlando shooting. So just curious on a number of levels, but the fact that they have their tentacles everywhere in our country and our world. This is the basically global private police force that we are encountering. And Trump apparently has some connection to the Dakota pipeline. His possible new potential U.S. Secretary of Energy, Harold Hamm, is a CEO of an energy company or an investment company that is investing heavily in the Dakota Access Pipeline. So it looks like Donald Trump is going to be definitely part of his energy program. And then finally wrapping up our news segment before we get into our wonderful interview and maybe a little discussion on these topics is the Seattle Seahawks apparently they're going to jump in on this protest, and reports that the entire Seattle Seahawks will protest at the opening game. And Adair, you had some thoughts on this.
I did. The article says the entire team. The article uses that quite liberally. That idea that an entire 53-man squad is going to kneel down during the national anthem. If that were to ever happen, the commissioner's office would start putting suspensions to players, and we're not talking about a game, 2 games. We're talking about conduct detrimental to the league, which can get you knocked out for an entire year. NFL salaries are not fully guaranteed, and a team can cut you for any reason they deem appropriate. So you want to protest, and the GM, the owners, whoever, they don't like it, you're gone. You so much as sneeze the wrong way in public, and you can be removed from the team. So I doubt that the entire team's going to do it. I can see a lot of the black players doing it, absolutely, because it's a very important issue to our community in particular. But also on the Seattle Seahawks team, some of the most outspoken players, Richard Sherman, Bobby Wagner, Michael Bennett, among others, are quite outspoken as is. So it would not be uncommon to see them participate in some type of protest action, though I don't really see this gaining traction simply because they're not going to be able to protect themselves if they do.
Brandon, thoughts?
Yeah. On the Seattle Seahawks sitting down?
Aren't you a sports guy?
No, I don't watch sports. And I can always tell when a sports story is getting a lot of play because I hear about it. Otherwise, I've never. I'll put it this way: I've seen the movie Space Jam more times than I've actually seen a game of basketball. And so,
I don't think I've never seen Space Jam, and I've never been to a basketball game. So
how do either of you go about your daily life, especially you, Dave? Space Jam is an iconic movie. Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes. I mean, come on, guys. But
they're doing another one, you know.
That's a sham.
It's a sham.
Some of my favorite movies are movies that star basketball players, and I would put this forward as the quote of the night. I think that every movie would be better if the main of the protagonist, the star, whatever you call it, was Shaquille O'Neal. No matter what the movie is.
Well, he'll play president at some point.
It takes place in. If it starred Shaq, and guest star Keanu.
Kazam.
Kazam is the best movie. Shazam is the superhero.
But we digress. Anything else? I heard some reactions to some of the things in the news stories. Any thoughts on the news items we talked about today?
I'm surprised by you, Dave. I would imagine that you would live in fear and be happy that the government is coming to strip the fear away from you by investing all of your hard-earned tax money into drones.
Yes,
and the
keeping
war
us
of terror.
safe. Keeping us safe with, well, we'll get into this on Sunday, but that drone program had quite a launch at the beginning of the Bush administration. So it's of course now escalated to a point where it's basically this is the way we fight our wars now. Hillary Clinton yesterday basically methinks thou protest too much, but she was right out there yesterday saying there will be no ground troops in Iraq, in Syria. I mean, she was emphatic about it. So, I think that's, yeah.
My question is, like, what if my problem with the war is not simply that Americans are dying in it? What if my problem with the war, like the drone wars and the conflict, and we'll call it the conflict, the police action in Pakistan or Yemen or Syria or any number of other countries that we are currently bombing at the behest of their autocratic governments. Like, what if my problem with that thing is not that Americans are dying? Well, I mean, not my sole problem. What if I'm concerned with people outside of American troops? And at a certain point, I look at troops the same way I look at the police force, and that by being a troop, by being a police officer, it's your job to put your life on the line. Like if you're going into if you're going to enforce the law or to exist in conflict, you have to kind of be prepared for it. I'm unmoved by the notion that cops are afraid to come home. Our biggest job is not to make sure that cops come home alive, or to make sure that our soldiers come home alive. Our biggest job is to accomplish whatever task they go there for. It's like that. Like, that's first and foremost. Like, I can't. I mean, it sounds callous, but at a certain point, my biggest problem in any conflict will be civilian death, regardless of if there are civilians or they're civilians. If we're engaging in a war and when we're measuring civilian death versus combatant death, I'm always going to be more moved by civilian death. And at a certain point, what is Aleppo? Aleppo is, an example of that. So is the bombings in Syria. other bombings in Syria. There are plenty of children and civilians being killed in these conflicts, and the way we justify that is, no Americans were killed in that conflict. That's how we frame every disaster overseas. Like, I remember. Well, I recall the Sri Lankan tsunami years ago, and it was just like, 8,000 people killed, 2 Americans died. I was like, you think I can't contextualize death unless it involves Americans? Like, I'm perfectly capable of feeling empathy for people who don't, share my birthplace of origin, but that might just be me.
Well, they never speak of the terror. I mean, there's plenty of terror. Most terrorist attacks happens to Muslim civilians, and those attacks are never mentioned. It's only the American. Anytime either a Westerner or an American is involved, and as far as Aleppo goes, of course it's tragic. The pictures are horrific. The chemical weapons are horrific, but we're killing kids all over the world. There's people killing kids everywhere. The teenagers in Saudi Arabia is one of the stories that we've been talking about. Eric, you've been dying to talk about this story, and I didn't even touch on it. But there's 2 teens being beheaded in Saudi Arabia. So there's plenty of outrage to go around in these countries. And Aleppo is merely the latest propaganda tool to get the American people to manufacture consent for the next war, the 2 wars that are being teed up, Iran and Syria.
I mean, I think it really speaks to the way that how we value life in American society. Like how does one accomplish having their life in their death be of meaning, and how do we devalue that among ourselves? And how do we make it? And I mean, one of the big ways that we do that is by referring to people as terrorists, right? Like, regardless of whether they were actually engaging in what we would consider colloquially to be a terrorist act. It comes down. What is our standard for making you a terrorist? Like, you're a male between the ages of 12 and
actually that's exactly the standard. That's what they use in the drone program, that basically any male between a certain age is considered an enemy combatant. They aren't used in the civilian death count for the drones. They only count women and obvious children and obvious women, of course. But yes, basically anybody in that age range is a terrorist, and they're fingerprinting 3-year-olds at Disney World, people.
Absolutely, and I mean, and like any criminologist will tell you that kind of labeling, that's labeling theory. That kind of labeling will affect the way people are viewed. It will affect the way people act towards them, will affect the way we interpret their death, their lives, their actions, and frankly, I think Americans, like mainstream media, treat these countries as though they are simply populated by, and I guess the pictures of children death are, bring us back to reality. Like, we treat these countries as though they're just populated by terrorists. That these countries, these towns, these villages are made up entirely of terrorists who all look like Osama bin Laden. But these are real societies.
Yes.
These are real places where people have real lives and real jobs. Maybe not real lives that we would consider to be legitimate because they don't live the way we do, because they want to wear a burqa or a burkini, and if you don't choose to live like American, you're not really capable of making any choices. But these places are still societies. They are populated 50% male, 50% female. That's just how places work.
And we were talking about the other day, Adair brought up the majority of them don't have any idea about September 11th or anything that happened. All of a sudden just a drone comes out and destroys their farm. Eric, you're trying to get in here?
Yeah, well, I was just, Brandon brought up a great point. And one thing that I have an issue with American politics in a sense, because we have this view that we're progressive just by caring about our own country and the people in our own country. But I don't think that view is valid. I think that if we are going to care about people and equality for all people, that we need to look outside of our own country. And like Brandon brought up, instead of doing that, what we've done is we have pretended that if you do not live within the borders of the United States of America, that suddenly you don't count, and that it doesn't mean that we should give you the same freedoms and the same equalities. And instead of fighting for those same equalities and freedoms for people all across the world, we view them as sort of like, the way I look at it is, I think that people view it as sort of like a video game, out of sight, out of mind. They don't see the harm they're causing. They don't see the damage that is being done. So instead, they view it as, okay, oh, we're still progressive, we're still democratic because we're fighting for domestic equality, when in reality, there's an issue with not fighting for global equality in my own viewpoint. How do you feel about that, Brandon?
I agree, but I think and just to bridge this also with the Seahawks and this new trend of protesting against the national anthem. This also comes down to the idea of choice and how your choices define you, and whether or not, how you utilize rights. Your right to make that choice defines whether or not you can, claim legitimate status as an American or as even a human. It's completely within the realm of the Constitution to protest the American flag. It's it's the literal First Amendment to the Constitution. It's in the Bill of Rights. But to utilize that right in this way makes you less than American. It makes you unpatriotic. And when you transpose that to you transpose that to Middle Eastern society, their choices to have, well, not choices, but their situation that are different, inherently or slightly, it makes them less human because we define humanity as from our lens. Like, if you're not living in the American way with McDonald's and Sunday night football, you're just not living right. And we're going to give you freedom at the barrel of a gun. That's how we do it. We have to give them freedom so that they can make the decisions we want them to make. And until they make those decisions, they're not free. It's very cyclical reasoning.
I just want to point out a great comment that was made on YouTube by Grandma Christine. She said that Martin Luther King Jr. said about the people that live in the countries that America makes war on, and this is a quote from MLK, "No document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers." And I think that's a great point. I think that perfectly illustrates the fact that regardless of what nation, what country, what tribe you belong to, that we're all human beings, we're all brothers and sisters, and we should all love each other.
That's true. But I mean, ultimately, the only way you can justify these drone wars, the only way you can justify the wholesale slaughter of Native Americans, the enslavement of Black people, of African Americans in the 1800s and before, the continued mistreatment of Black people, the mistreatment of Native Americans, the mistreatment of Muslim people, is if you accept that they are viewed as less than human. Otherwise, that sort of thing, just like, despite our, the way we view ourselves as progressive, as liberators, as all these things, you can't justify these sort of activities unless you view them as less than human. It's like James Baldwin said, the circumstances of American society have turned us into moral monsters as it applies to people who do not look like us. Like our empathy just doesn't extend that far.
I think Adair's trying to get in there.
I didn't want to jump in without everyone being set up. But I mean, so here's my perspective on all of this, having listened to what everyone's had to say. And I still feel that it's an inescapable fact that everything goes back to one simple concept, and that is money. That comes back to these wars are profitable for people. Let's not call a duck anything other than a duck. Dick Cheney made millions and millions of dollars off of the Iraq War. There's OPEC, so the oil-producing nations have their own economic group, and they come together and they set oil prices and things like that. Well, you know what? What's going to be good for the economy? Getting companies in there and allowing them to get this oil. We have this idea, and it's something that's been going on throughout American history, where we paint people in opposition to what the economic goals are of certain segments of society, typically those that are wealthy, those that are controlling land. You see it with the expansionism of early America, this idea that there's a manifest destiny and America must reach from shore to shore because that's our God-given duty. And that was used to justify the brutal extermination of native peoples, of launching different wars. You have the war with Mexico. You have a war with Texas. You just go on and on. The British, even not even just the War of 1812, and we'll get into that more, I'm sure, when we start talking about the national anthem protests. But you see this kind of thing repeated in history, and you see it happening again and again and again. History is cyclical. Everything happens and it replays itself out. Except, the technology is different. The names are different. I feel some things aren't as acceptable. So, like in the 40s and 50s, you had the communist threat, the Red Scare. You had McCarthyism. You had people being drugged in front of congressional hearings to sit and testify that, hey, I'm American. And we're seeing the same kind of idea happen. It's just now, instead of communist, we use different buzzwords. We use terrorist. We use thug. We use Muslim. We use, things like that to denote people, well, you're inherently un-American. As I've said on this show in the past, when I was at the Democratic National Convention, because of my standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement, I was told to my face that I'm un-American because that kind of thing isn't what we do. That protesting, whatever symbols that is supposed to be the greatness of America is unacceptable for someone to do. So I think it all comes back to this idea that, we scapegoat people. We scapegoat groups of people for the benefit of a few, and I think we're seeing that play out on a larger global scale now with little to no regard of geopolitics.
Well, the 1% concept that Bernie Sanders has been talking about for a year and less, the 1/10 of 1%, they're out there. They made a lot of money legitimately, quote, legitimately on the war in Iraq and the wars that have been going on for the last 15 years. But there's a lot of illegitimate money that got made right near the beginning of all this. It's been going on forever, of course. But we're going to talk about, that on Sunday, possibly. There's a lot of money. It's all about the money. And, as any criminal investigation would do, which we never had, they would follow the money, just like any good Law and Order episode. It's the investigation to 911 wasn't even a good Law and Order episode. There was no investigation. They didn't investigate. They didn't interview any witnesses. It was a complete whitewash, and there was no effectively investigation. So we can talk about that on Sunday. But we have a wonderful guest waiting in the green room. And we can talk forever, the four of us. So let's bring in our guest, Eric. I'm going to throw it over to you. Maybe you can do a little introduction, and we can get into our next part of our show.
Yeah, so we are happy to be joined today by Kelsey Hulse. She is running for Thurston County Commissioner in District 2, I believe, if I got that right. I did get it right. She's nodding her head. And we're excited to have her today. She's a great progressive candidate. As Katie Nelson, the Thurston County Democrats chair, said, you Bernie-crats, she said, you're looking for young progressive candidates, and we have some great ones here at Thurston County, including Kelsey Hulse and Jim Cooper, who we're going to have on next week, who's running for the other Thurston County Commissioner position. Now, start it off, if you could, for us, Kelsey, and just tell us what made you want to run for this, and explain to us a little bit about what you did before you were county commissioner, because I do believe that's interesting as well.
Sure. So I have been involved in nonprofit fundraising for about the last 5 years. Most recently, or currently, I work for the Evergreen State College. And so I do fundraising for scholarships there. I see Adair pumping his fist. Big fan of Evergreen. Prior to that, I led the capital campaign for our local food bank, the Thurston County Food Bank. So we raised $3.5 million to expand the capacity to serve the community there. And I think that particularly that experience at the food bank was really formative for me in terms of really seeing that there were still a lot of families in our community that were struggling. At the same time, our local food bank has more than 8,000 volunteers that turn up every year. So there's a huge capacity also for caring and a willingness to, within this community, to roll up your sleeves and get to work and get stuff done to benefit our friends and neighbors. So I think that both gave me a perspective on some of the challenges that we're facing, but also the capacity that we have to really make change and make a difference here. In terms of why I got into this race specifically, it was really thinking about, well, it was kind of two things. It was thinking about the fact that we've got a lot of growth projected for this community. And so we're going to be making some choices in the near future that are really going to impact generations of people that'll live here. And so if we want to protect the quality of life that we have, and a big part of that is our natural environment, then we're going to have to make those choices now. So that was really compelling to me in terms of getting into the race. And I was going to make another point, and I lost it.
well, it's okay, because maybe we could just go in a different direction here real quick.
Sure.
Because one great thing that I have heard when I've talked to people about you and Jim both and why they should support you, pardon my French here, but they look at me and say, what the hell is a county commissioner? And I think it's a very important position, and I would love for you to help us educate our viewers, and we'll be able to share this out afterwards to educate people on what a county commissioner is, what the importance of the job is, and maybe explain why you are better suited and your vision for the position is better than the vision of your opponents.
Sure. So county commissions are sort of funny entities, and they're not all the same, is one thing I want to mention. So I'll talk a little bit about Thurston County's commission, and while lots of counties in Washington are similar to Thurston County, there's also many counties that aren't, right? And primarily counties that have larger populations. So for instance, in Thurston County, we have a 3-commissioner board that is both the legislative and budgetary authority for the county. That is, as I said, common in many counties, but once a county population gets above 300,000, I believe, that board turns into a 5-person board. There are also various charters and different things that have been pursued in different counties, which create different governing bodies. So you'll see that in counties like particularly King County, which is obviously much larger. So primary roles are as a legislative and budgetary authority. The county itself provides a whole variety of services, of course, and those kind of fit into 3 different buckets. One is services that are provided across the county, right? So whether you live in a city or you live in an unincorporated area, the county is the entity that provides auditor services, right? So anything that has to do with voting, for instance, or the assessor that will assess your property and levy property taxes. The coroner, for instance, the county clerk. Those are all things that, like I said, regardless where you live in this county, those services are provided by the county. There are also another bucket is services that are provided to the unincorporated county specifically. So everybody that lives outside of one of the cities in Thurston County. And those are things like roads and bridges, water, wastewater, stormwater, any sort of services, infrastructure improvements that have to do with those things all fall to the county. And then the third piece is intergovernmental or interjurisdictional work or interjurisdictional bodies that county commissioners serve on. So those are things like here in Thurston County, we have a wastewater utility that's called the LOT Alliance. And so a county commissioner serves on the LOT Alliance board. Same thing with Intercity Transit, which is our transportation authority here. So, and there's a whole variety of those. So the thing that's sometimes tough to understand is that the county does do a whole bunch of different things, right? And they have their hands, it's everything from, like I said, those assessor type responsibilities, levying property taxes, collecting property taxes, those kinds of things, all the way down to, they are the administrator of the county fair, and they take care of the noxious weed program. So there's really a whole breadth of things that they do, which I think is what makes it challenging for people to really understand and get involved with the work of their county governments.
So I know that you've done a lot of campaign events, and I've seen a lot of different events that you were doing. So can you tell us a little bit about the feel that you've had from people, both supporters or maybe people who aren't looking to support your campaign? What is the type of reactions, both negative and positive, that you've had with your campaign so far?
Sure, and we've done a variety of campaign events. We've also been knocking on a lot of doors, so we're reaching people that way as well. The response that we've gotten, I would say, has been, I don't want to say overwhelmingly positive. I want to make sure I'm not getting, I don't know, I suppose overconfident, but that doesn't make sense. Anyway, the response has been really positive. For the most part, it seems like people are eager to see new faces. They're eager to see younger people getting involved in the political process, although at the same time I hear on a regular basis that I'm just too young for this. So, mostly positive. I think when I run into somebody who is not positive about my race or me as a candidate, it tends to be, either, I've had several people at the door say, well, are you voting for Donald Trump? So that conversation generally doesn't go well. But for the most part, it's folks that are really angry or frustrated with the county, that have had interactions in the past that have really frustrated them, made them feel like either they haven't been heard, that the county doesn't represent them, doesn't care about them. A lot of those issues are surrounding sort of land use and permitting, but those are the things that, when I talk to somebody about something that hasn't gone well, or when I talk to somebody who is really eager for dramatic change in the county, it's usually because of one of those issues. And I apologize for you'll hear noise in the background. I'm actually sitting here at the Democrats headquarters in Thurston County. I couldn't get home from work in time for this, so I apologize for that. But yeah, so it has really, we've had a really positive response. Like I said, what's going on right now in Thurston County that's, as I understand it, happening in other parts of the world as well, or other parts of the country as well, is that we've had a fairly democratic, progressive board of commissioners in the past. And so what's actually going on at the moment is there's sort of a concerted effort by conservatives or by Republicans in the county, which tend to fall into the minority, to sort of take hold of this governing entity. Primarily around, the interests are primarily around land use, and how do I think the struggle is over how much land should be opened up for development, essentially, and what people should be able to do with their private property.
Yeah, that's the land use thing is very important, I think, especially with a lot of concerns about climate change, and that is a big concern, I know, especially for the Thurston County community. So I had one more question for you, and then I'm going to kick it off to Adair so he can ask you a few questions as well. But one thing, in doing a little research recently, and kind of from my own experience, I knew this from my own experience, is that there's a problem in Thurston County that's much larger than most people would expect, and that's people being below the poverty line. We're way more of an impoverished area than a lot of people would expect. From the outside appearance, I guess, you wouldn't guess that people are struggling financially as hard as they really are. And some of the numbers that I've read and seen are astronomical. What do you think we can do, or what can you do as a commissioner to kind of affect change in terms of the poverty level in Thurston County, and what things would your opponent do that could maybe hurt that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we really have to start doing is having, courageous conversations is sort of an overused term sometimes, but really having conversations about what is it that causes people to be or remain in poverty, what is it that keeps them impoverished, and what can we do to move them out of that situation. I mean, working at the food bank was one of the things that I did there was try and work the intake window at least once a week to get a chance to talk to and get to know some of the folks that we served. And the reality is that it's a whole variety of different things. But in many cases, the cost or what it would take to get these folks on a path to independence or on a path to self-reliance is often very little. There just isn't the political will to do it. And so I think having practical conversations around what can we do to help. The other piece is obviously there's, as I said, the county commissioners are the budgetary authority, and so there's only so much money to go around. And so really making sure that our budgetary decisions reflect our values as a community and as a county, which to me, one of those values is really taking care of our friends and neighbors and making sure that that is one of our top priorities. And so the concern for me is I'm running against someone who will advocate for putting more money into, for instance, the sheriff's office because he's a former sheriff. But that has to come from somewhere, right? So if we're not going to raise revenue, which is also something that my opponent as well as Jim's opponent are against, then where does that money come from? And oftentimes it comes at the expense of these programs that don't have strong, powerful advocates for them, right? Because the people that they benefit are the well-off in the community. And so that was a big fear. Working at the food bank, we had a great example of that. There's a program that the county administers and pays for that basically provides a refrigerated van that can pick up food for the food bank. Very low cost, right? Doesn't cost much. It would be easy to see somebody sort of striking that out of a budget to try and save some money. But the reality is that van allows the food bank to rescue over 1 million pounds of fresh foods, which are redistributed to folks in our community. So it's a tiny investment that yields this huge return in terms of social services and resources redirected to those who most need them. And so that was one thing that I wanted to make sure didn't happen, right? That we weren't making those choices that were going to make things even harder for either the people that are currently living in poverty or the organizations that are trying to serve them. The other piece is that I think we need to look around because we do have, both in our county, we have programs that are working really, really well that aren't fully funded, right? Why is that? We know it works. It's been effective. So let's have a conversation around what does it cost to fully fund that and how do we get that done in the short term? Because we know it's an answer for part of the problem, right? It doesn't fix everything, but it's a piece of it. And beyond our county, there are communities in this country too, but there were a couple examples in Canada of communities that have reached functional zero homelessness, right? This is not rocket science. People know how to do these things. So let's look for those best practices and think, how do we put those in play here in Thurston County to serve the folks that are counting on us?
Yeah, I think the food bank is so important and so undervalued in our community. I will say that for my family personally, we were heavily dependent on the food bank and similar programs. And so it's really disappointing that someone would, that your opponent would proposition putting more funding into policing when frankly it seems like that's probably already pretty set in our area. And taking that away from families that are in need. But I don't want to hog you this whole time. I know Adair is also eager to ask some questions to you. So I am going to pass it on to Adair here. And I know he's got some great questions to ask you, Kelsey. Thank you for taking my questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to say thank you as well for coming on, Kelsey. For those of you who don't know, full disclosure, Kelsey and I have a mutual acquaintance, very awesome progressive state representative here in Washington State. So we've talked a little bit back and forth, and I do plan to help out when I can. For some of the interview style things. So one of the things I've noticed about Thurston County, there has been a rapid amount of growth. I lived in Yelm when I was a kid, and when I lived in Yelm, which for those of you who don't know is a very small town in Thurston County, there was just the main street and a grocery store. And now I go back and there's a ton of housing developments. There's apartments. There's a Walmart, which was shocking. But as a college student who actually happens to attend the Evergreen State College, there are some unique concerns that I have because I've seen what rapid development does. Being from Seattle and living most of my life here in Tacoma, Washington, which is now seeing its own incredible spike in housing developments being built. We're seeing historically black neighborhoods are being torn down, houses are being raised to put in coffee shops and micro studios, and housing costs are skyrocketing. So how do you plan to kind of curb that enthusiasm there? And for what development is done, how do you feel about affordable housing? Because I do know a lot of us that attend the Evergreen State College are mostly from this state, and a lot of us are having a really hard time finding a place to live because there's not much affordable housing in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we constantly have to be looking at, right? Is are we building a variety of housing options for a variety of different kinds of people? Where I live in the unincorporated county, and right now there are 5 different housing developments going in out by me within about 5 miles of me, most of which were forest land before, right? So this is all new development. And then they put up these signs that say, houses starting at $420K or $450K or something. And, I just stand there looking at that sign and go, is that housing that we need? Is that what we're missing? Because it doesn't feel like that from my perspective. So, I mean, I think like I said, it will be very hard to roll back any growth or development that we allow to happen. So we have to make these choices now. But to me, what brought me to Thurston County and what I think a lot of people value and contributes to the quality of life here is proximity to forest land and open spaces and rural and agricultural land. The ability to produce food in this community, I think, is huge and is a big part of what makes it a really great place to live. And so if we want to have forests, if we want to have farms, if we want to have open space in the future, we have to protect that right now. And so those are land use decisions that have to be made. In terms of housing and where do we put it, what we really need to look at, and it's interesting because I was not endorsed by the Realtors Association. My opponent was, but I had a great conversation at the door with a realtor who was talking about how she moved up from, I want to say California, but she was really fascinated by what a fixation there was on new development as opposed to rehab and infill development, which is what you see in a lot of other communities. And that's where I think our opportunities lie, right? Whether you look, regardless of where on the economic spectrum or where on the price spectrum you're looking, we need to be looking at what can we do with developed land, land that's already developed, what's redevelopable, where can we really put infill development, where can we make things more dense, because those are going to be the places that we can also deliver services like transportation or water or wastewater, all the infrastructure pieces that really end up costing a lot of money. So I think affordable housing has got to be, it's always got to be part of the discussion. That's never going to be something that's finished. And I think it's often talked about like, well, we'll build this project and then we'll have affordable housing and, yippee. But I think there's not a lot of acknowledgement that that's going to be that has to be an ongoing discussion. It always has to be a balancing and rebalancing of, again, do we have the types of housing that we need? And, right now in this community, we're closer than it is in King County, but we've got work to do on that as well. And like I said, when I see the majority of units going up near me being incredibly expensive, that makes me feel like maybe we're missing the mark.
I definitely agree with that. And one of the things I've noticed, at least since, and for those who are familiar somewhat with Thurston County, I left Thurston County in 1998, and we moved from Yelm to Lakewood, Washington, which is a very dense urban area. It's part of the city of Tacoma and Pierce County. I noticed a boom almost because of farms declining in their profits and people not being able to hire as many people to come and help out. There was a huge spike in drug abuse in the more rural areas of Washington, it appears that Thurston County was not exempt from that. How do we move forward in treating people in Thurston County like people? One of the talking with some of my classmates and some of my professors, they've had some really bad run-ins with police when they've called either asking for help. Recently, we've seen that 2 young black men were shot just this last year. They were armed with nothing but a skateboard. I'm hearing from people out there like, yeah, there's a lot of people out here who have severe methamphetamine addictions who are just being cycled in and out of jail, and that's costing the taxpayers money. What are some things that you think the county commission could do to kind of help reverse that trend, the cyclical nature, of the way we treat people addicted to drugs, and how do we really integrate police and train them? Because there is an explosion of population in Thurston County, and that includes people of color like myself who might be a little leery of what we've already heard and what we've experienced, especially in the larger cities.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's several great points in there. But I think a big part of it is, let me back up a minute. So in terms of the county budget, we've got a structural budget deficit right now, and so we do a lot of talking about how can we raise revenue to address that problem. But the other piece of that is how can we recognize cost savings in the long run? And one of the places where I think that is where we've got the greatest capacity for that is in the particularly in the prison system, right? Because we do tend to incarcerate people over and over and over again. They get caught in a cycle where they're just going, round and around and around, and it's not solving any problem. It's not helping anybody. And so, in this county, we've had some real success in the juvenile justice system using restorative justice and judicial reform and alternative courts and some of these more progressive policies to get youth out of that system, right? To actually look at what are the challenges that they're facing, what is causing them to be in a situation where they are committing crimes, and how do we get them out of that situation, right? How do we change the story there? And so I think we can look at the juvenile justice system, and say, what have we learned there that we can put to work with our adult populations? Because right now we haven't made those same progressive reforms for the adult prison population, and I think we can and we should. And I think not only is it the right thing to do, because it absolutely is, but also we will see that it costs a lot less on a per person basis if we're not just cycling these folks through the system. So I think that's one piece of it. The other piece that I've been really encouraged by is I have been reaching out to folks in law enforcement, and there are a lot of them who want to be better, who want to be held to high standards, who want to be accountable to their communities, who see themselves as servants of their communities, and they want to be part of a solution rather than a problem, right? And so I'm really encouraged by that, because while we certainly have our challenges here as well as nationwide, I see that as sort of the seeds of change, right? Like the critical things that need to exist to be able to create a more just system are there. We just have to keep pushing on it, right? We have to keep making changes where we can, keep moving forward, keep working together, keep focused on the fact that this is all of our community together, and that we're responsible for it together. So how do we create the community we all want to live in?
Absolutely, I definitely agree with that. I think this has been an enlightening conversation, because one of the things that I understand about the county commission, this is prior to, and then I feel that having this conversation has added on to it, is that a lot of people understand is I view the county commission kind of like the mayor of the county, right? We have a set number of people on the county, whereas the mayor might be the executive branch for the city. The county commission is that executive branch for the county. And because of that, you guys have to take into account all of these different ideas about what's going on. But my last real big question, and I think this is going to be a little bit deeper, and I'm kind of curious as to what your answer will be. is as populations expand, as cities get larger, as we're seeing with Olympia, especially with Evergreen State becoming more and more recognized, so more and more students are wanting to go there, the graduate programs that it offers, with Yelm having apartment complexes and Lacey starting to add more, inner-city transit is going to be absolutely key. And as students, from Tacoma, like myself, I know when I walked onto campus last year, there was a huge, huge piece of art about the Upward Bound program of Lakewood and Tacoma, trying to get students to go to Evergreen State. Those of us from this area who live up here rely on inner-city transit to get back and forth, but there's very little, very, very little bus routes that go from Olympia to Tacoma. It's incredibly hard to manage to find time to go to college, to work, and then still have to catch the bus. I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like if there's someone who lives in one of the more rural parts of Thurston County, and there's already such limited bus service. Don't get me wrong, I think it's much better than Pierce Transit right now. But how do we make that more accessible to people? Because A, it will help combat climate change. The less people we have out there driving, the less CO2 we're getting put in the air. But it also it's much more convenient, especially for people such as myself who come from incredibly low-income houses, for us to get around, because we can't always afford a car or gas or insurance.
Yeah, and I think that is a piece of a larger question around what are the services that we need in this community, and how do we pay for them, right? Rather than, one of my feelings or frustrations has been that we tend to approach things from sort of a revenue-starved position, where we go, okay, well, what's the cheapest option, right? We know we have no money, so what's the least expensive thing we can do? And I take very seriously the responsibility of stewarding taxpayer dollars, but I think we're asking the wrong question. I think the question should be, what is it that the community needs, and then looking at how do we pay for it, right? And I think particularly around transportation and around intercity transit, I know that they have some leadership there that would love to, they want to see ridership expanded, they want to see routes expanded, they want to do more. So I'm not sure what the right answer is in terms of that happening, but it is going to be a key piece. My belief is that this part of the world, Western Washington, is one of the most beautiful places in the country, that people will continue to want to live here in perpetuity. People are never going to get tired of it. They're never going to, we're never going to be full. And aside from, building a wall, people are going to continue to come, right? And so then it becomes a density issue. And as we're addressing that housing piece, right, that we talked about a little earlier in terms of infill development and density and where we put people, transportation is going to be a key piece of it, because we also can't, there is no functional system in which every person in a dense city has a vehicle, right? Like, that doesn't work. And one, because it's unrealistic just in terms of the means of people that live in that variety of housing options we talked about before, but two, just logistically, that doesn't work. So we really will need to make some substantial investments in infrastructure, and it's something that we should be preparing for. I mean, we shouldn't be planning for just next year, the year after that, right? We should be talking 5 and 10 and 25 years down the road. What's our community going to look like, and what are the actions that we take today to build toward that vision?
And I want to say thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you for your honest and passionate leadership. I also want to open up the floor for anybody else. If Brandon or Dave have a question, Eric, if you want to jump in again. I really want to say I appreciate the honesty in the answers that you've given and the future that you have. So you definitely have my vote, though. You had it before.
Mine too.
Thank you.
I would love to see you get up there. I think you're going to do absolutely amazing things for the county, and I really hope to work closely with you in the future as a citizen of Thurston County. Anybody else have any questions?
Brandon looked like he was asleep.
He's talking and muted.
Yeah, he's talking and muted. You gotta unmute yourself, Brandon.
Sorry, no, I was listening. I was also looking at the YouTube chat and making sure everything was all right.
Did you have any questions, Brandon, before we let Kelsey go?
Oh no, I don't have any questions. I like the answers I've heard, especially as it relates to housing and transportation. I once lived in a town that sounds similar to the situation you have going on, where every commute was a 3-hour commute. Every commute was I have to take bus A to bus B, and the buses only come once every 45 minutes. And you try to explain to them, like, listen, I'm going to school. I want to have a life, and the buses stop running at 5 p.m. and they don't run after 3 p.m. on Sunday. What kind of functionally, how can I work? It's like functionally, like how can I go to class and then have a job across town? It's going to take me 3 hours to get to and from. It's just not really a functional kind of situation to live in. Like transportation, just to talk about the Green Party, transportation is a big part of the Green Party's platform. As just to bring it up, because you don't hear a lot. The idea that transportation is a human right, being able to get from point A to point B is a human right, and also has a big effect on whether or not you live in food security or not. I know for me, where I lived in that situation, I had no access to food within the immediate area, and every trip to the grocery store was a 3-hour trip to the grocery store. And I don't know how cold it gets in Washington, but it would get to negative 20 degrees in upstate New York. Negative 20, negative 25. And it was, okay, well, can I go get food this week or today, or should I just eat pizza all day because otherwise I'm going to freeze? So access to transportation, public transportation is a very big, it's an issue dear to my heart.
Well, before we let you go, Kelsey, we want to give you a couple minutes here to just give some closing remarks and let people know where they can find you. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Sure. I would encourage everybody to check out my website. The website's www.kelseyhulse.com. Simple. But would really encourage everybody to get involved in a local race. Right, and that's something that Katie talks a lot about, and you talked about earlier in the show. But I think this is, there are two things that I'm really passionate about outside of the policy issues in this race, and one is getting folks involved in the political process who never have been before. Right, bringing people into whether it's fundraisers or sign waving or doorbelling or whatever. Let's bring people in that haven't been involved before, because my belief is the more people that are involved, the better a system that we'll have. And two, let's build the government that we want from the ground up. Let's build some trust. Let's build some faith in government by being honest and open and transparent and forthcoming, because that is how we'll change this whole system, right? It's going to start at the grassroots level. It's going to start at the bottom, at the local level, and work its way up. But we can do it. People don't give up. So please do, continue to fight your fight in whatever way you see fit, but get involved and encourage other people, encourage your friends to get involved, help them find a little way that they can play a role in a city council campaign or something at their county level, because that's where it all starts and that's where change will be made.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that's very important, and that's one thing here at Project Cnty that we try to do, and this is kind of our way to try to help get people involved, keep people informed, and I don't think there's a significant amount of people that do this kind of thing with local level candidates, and so that's very important. People staying involved. I know we're all committed to doing that. So I think that we're going to move on to the next part of the show. Kelsey, you're more than welcome to hang out. I guess I just said the same word twice. And listen to what's going on. And I think that we're going to move on to what we call a deep dive. But before we do that, just want to go ahead and do some station identification type stuff. You're watching us right now on a couple different places. ProjectSanity.org, which is our independent YouTube channel. You're also watching us on Benjamin Dixon's channel, who has been so gracious as to host us so that his audience can see us as well. And then Dave has us streaming in beautiful, full color on Our Revolution TV on YouTube. And so Dave's getting everything situated here, and we're going to switch on over. Oh, yeah, we're on Twitch now, too. I mean, we're just too many places. I don't know. Thank you, Kelsey.
Yes, thank you, Kelsey.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome.
Well, thank you. All right, now that we just kicked out the only person who was pretty, now we have to move to ugly mugs.
I think we all agree that Dave is the pretty.
Yeah, what's
Dave
that?
is pretty.
What do
Well,
you-
see, Dave
and
wasn't on the
Brandon.
screen
Brandon's not
when I
pretty.
said that.
I mean, come on.
No, Brandon's funny.
And that's really
Brandon's
and that was
funny.
actually really sexist. I think that's what that was. That was a sexist comment.
Brandon's funny, but looks aren't everything, so
Yeah.
we have to move on.
Well, how many hours are you at the gym today, Brandon?
Huh? I mean, how many hours? Never mind. I'm not gonna. Anyway.
Well, that was great. You know, I think we need to focus more on local races. This is where things change at the local levels. This is where real change happens, and where change can happen, because there are people even in LA here that are winning seats and councils, and with just 3,000 votes or minuscule amounts of votes, and we can do that. That's how they took over for the last 10 years. And it was all started at a local level. Bernie even said it, we got to get into the school boards and city councils. And so that was great. And I look forward to next week and her opponent.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. And unfortunately, in American society, we so inextricably make the amount of money spent in the election, like the pomp and circumstance, like the circuses surrounding it, unable, like we can't see the stakes behind that. We can't see the stakes if there's not $1 trillion being spent on attack ads, and when most of the decisions being made by people like Kelsey, like your superintendent, like Aaron Jones, or her opponent,
Chris Rickdahl.
Yeah, Chris Rickdahl. So. It comes down to being a fundamental shift in the way we view politics in America as being more than simply how much money is being spent, and that's something that's on all of us. We have to get beyond this media culture into one that's more based on substance.
I think that's what our next segment's going to be all about, right? Substance. Why we call it our deep dive.
That is why we call it our deep dive.
So what's the topic for tonight, guys?
Well, I think that we want to. Our buddy Miguel, who was on last week, who is at the Dakota Pipeline, he wanted, he got a great video of a protest or a protector at the Dakota Pipeline, who did a little bit of a short interview with Miguel. So I think we're going to play that, and we may have some other things to bring up from the Dakota Pipeline. But we're definitely going to do a deep dive talking about everything that's going on there and the consequences and similar actions. So I think Dave's got that queued up.
The sound might be a little low, but I'm going to do my best to get it for you. It's a very interesting video. Here it goes.
In my life. How'd you get up there? How'd you get up on this land killer?
I took this just for my people and my children, so that they can have good drinking water to wash each them to protect our future generations. They don't have to drink poison. The water's already poisoned. We're gonna poison it more. So my people are here. Both the people, all nations, are here to protect. We're not here for violence, but we will not let them build. We will not let them build. My people, this is my Tioshpae here.
How does it?
Good reason.
How does it feel to do this work?
It's like electricity flowing through your body. Your hair stands on end. You really don't have any concept of things surreal. Like, I never thought this would happen in my lifetime. I'm good. I got both of my sons here. I got my friends here. We're here to protect the people.
We're not going anywhere.
We're not moving. This is we're honoring that 1851 treaty. The government has to honor it. The 7 council fires are united. Have to honor it. We won't move. We stand firm. We're Lakota people. Protect this earth. Protect them. Protect it. She put us here. We're from the Star Nation. This is our land. Our right as human beings. Our rights to protect Mother Earth. Protect the people that are here. We don't need to keep destroying her. She's screaming at us. We have to listen. If we don't listen, will punish us, take us. Our duty to be stewards of this earth. It says that in the Bible. But we've always known this because we're protectors. Protectors. Remember that. We're protectors.
You got any words for the water drinkers out there who aren't here?
Whatever your tezi, your stomach tells you, whatever your heart tells you, that's how you know if it's right or wrong. If you want to come and protect the water with us, come. You're welcome. We're all sober here. We're all of one mind, one body, one spirit. That water is life. It is a spirit. You have to listen to it. Sometimes it'll tell you, I give you life. Without me, you die. So those that are out there drinking water, civilized world, remember us here. We want you here to help protect that future water that you at your home. God, I say, oh, mataki, I say, oh,
Aho.
Wow. So, what do you guys think? How do you feel after watching that?
Well, I think what's worth mentioning before we just to contextualize things. A lot of people, it's hard for them to understand this kind of attachment to the land and to the water. But that sort of attachment. It becomes very important to understand that in a lot of Native cultures, we're talking about Native Americans, or within the United States, or Native Americans within South America. Like, their culture is inextricably attached to a specific piece of land, a specific water. Their mythology speaks to that place. Like, it's a very place and space based culture, different from ours, different from our sort of late modernity. Everything is shifting. You move from one place to another a lot. Various apartments over your life. Like, their entire culture tends to be situated in a very specific place, landmarks, that particular, mountain range, this particular river. And, studies have shown when you remove these people from these places, there are a lot of negative side effects from doing that. And it's not just they lose their culture, but they suffer from higher rates of depression. They suffer from higher rates of illnesses, diseases. It's a very, whether you think of it as psychosomatic or cultural, whatever, like, there are very real implications for them as it comes to this land. That's something that we don't really understand within, I don't want to say American culture, because obviously they are also, they preceded us in being in America, but we just don't have that kind of attachment to a physical place the way they do, the way their culture does. And understanding the kind of negative repercussions of messing with their land, just to sort of give a little context to why they feel so strongly about it. Like, they have a very place and land based culture and religion and all the aspects of that and history.
Well, and here's the thing, that no matter what culture you look at throughout the entirety of human history, water has been something that is held as sacred, that is held as having these impressive spiritual powers, as something that must be protected. And it's true to this day that water is inherently important. Without water, we do not exist. No life survives. No carbon-based life form is going to live without water. Period. You need it. I need it. The plants need it. The earth, like, we need water. And so for people to destroy a sacred site in the name of profit, and then to further treat it with a low level of regard, such as to poison it with oil spills, because I guarantee you there's going to be an oil spill. I think we all know that. We've seen the fact that equipment's faulty and humans are fallible. You are going to irreparably damage the environment in the name of $500 million, for 3, maybe 4 people. And that's something that people aren't understanding. But one of the other issues that we're running into, though, is also systemic racism and the fact that America does not want to come to terms with the fact that every piece of land you're standing on anywhere in America is stolen land achieved through generations of genocide and war. Period. There's no denying that fact. There's no getting around that fact. It's repeating itself. It's Old West expansionism. It's this idea, again, that we talked about earlier. Now, instead of it being terrorism or thugs, it's native peoples, and people in general just don't matter in the name of profit. You wouldn't bulldoze Arlington Cemetery and put an oil pipeline through it. Why would you go through and disturb sacred burial grounds or any sacred ground? Tribe?
They would. They absolutely, like, if they could get away with it, they absolutely.
But what I'm saying, that was directed towards the people that are being apologists for the DAPL.
Yeah, and I think you're making a good point. And I think that in a lot of ways, the native struggle has been used by opponents to make this seem like a fringe issue. But we're talking about water. This pipeline crosses over 200 different rivers and creeks and watersheds, including the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. Like, 2 of the biggest rivers in the United States of America are at the potential for being harmed if there is a spill, and that would affect the drinking water of millions of people, not just Native Americans, not just people on reservations, but people in major cities, in more rural areas, farmlands. By making this seem like it's a native racial issue, it's really obscuring the point that this pipeline is just as long as the Keystone XL. It's just as long. I'm sorry, no, it's 7 miles shorter. But it's just as long as the Keystone XL pipeline. It has the same potential for damage to the environment. But the people who are standing up for it, the people who are most opposed to it, this time tend to be Native American. And that's also being used as a way to obfuscate this issue. It's being used as a way to make it seem like, oh, this is just a fringe issue and only Native Americans should care about it. But no,
Iowa. They're fighting it in Iowa too. It's an eminent domain issue in Iowa, where part of this is gonna, where this eventually is gonna end up. So it's not. Yeah, it is. I think the Native Americans, the first Americans, they're the ones that are like, I guess, bringing our attention to it. Despite the lack of cell service out there in that part of the reservation, which is constant, part of the problem. Here we have no services provided, to these communities, and that's been a problem forever. This wasn't a conspiracy; they just don't have it. They don't get it. So, it's environmental racism. You have, and there is we're talking about coalitions, and there is a coalition that can form here between the native peoples and the people that love water, and the eminent domain people, the people, the libertarians, and the people on the right that don't want the government taking land. So there's a place where we can come together on this to stop this and its spider web of pipelines that are going to come out of it.
Well, here's something that you said that I think, Dave, that stuck to me. You said there's an opportunity for a coalition, right?
Right.
Here's one thing that I need people to understand is every one of us drinks water. Every one of us.
That's a good coalition.
With it. But I mean, and I want to speak particularly to other black folks out there right now. If you've been here for long enough that you can't trace your family history back to Ellis Island or Angel Island over in the West Coast, your family was likely here during slavery. If your family was here during slavery, some of your ancestors are Native American, and it's your job Your job to do the research on that, to find out whether or not that is part of your ancestral background, and then B, to find out the culture and the history of the people, because we are letting native cultures die out in America, and it's absolutely disgusting. It is also our job as black people. When African Americans were brought here, when we were slaves in this country, it was the native tribes that came and helped us out. It is our duty as a community to stand with our native brothers and sisters and Two-Spirit folks right now. You've seen that Black Lives Matters has sent emissaries and say, we stand here in solidarity with Standing Rock. That is something that has to be done. I mean, it's nuts. And Dave, you're right. Republicans should be angry about this. All you people out there all you folks, I don't want to say you people, that's incredibly offensive. All of you folks out there saying, well, I want a smaller government, get out to Standing Rock. You realize that farmlands and all,
where's Bundy?
No one.
Sorry?
No.
Where the fuck is Bundy? Oh, he's in jail, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But
well, the other thing, and I don't know if I'm stealing this a little early, and if you had planned on showing this clip later, Dave, but something that's very important to address here is the way that the company, I forget, you know the name, GT what? Or 2G2, whatever the name is. G4S.
Yeah.
I knew it had a lot of
something
numbers.
like that.
Letters,
Yeah, they like numbers.
So the way that they have been able to create their own police agency and go out there with attack dogs, and I'm seeing pictures of children who may not even be school age yet. It doesn't matter even that it's children. People in general should not be treated this way. But the fact that they have been allowed to do this to children, and you don't see Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or President Obama or any of them standing up and crying out that this is something that should not happen in America and that this should not be allowed, it really pisses me off. And I do not understand how this is just happening. I do not understand how they are allowed to treat human beings with zero dignity and attack children with dogs. And there has been excuses that, oh, the dogs just got away, that they didn't intentionally let the dogs attack them. I don't care what their intentions were. The fact of the matter is that there were children who were hospitalized with bite marks to their faces because this business, a business, not a government entity, decided to take German shepherds that were trained to attack human beings to a spot where peaceful protesters, including children, women, it doesn't really matter, even if it's grown men, it doesn't matter. You should not be able to do this. And we're just allowed to do this. And as Adair pointed out in a conversation we had earlier before the show, that these are considered lethal weapons. Police consider them lethal weapons, the dog. So in fact, it probably causes more damage. An attack dog probably causes more damage than a taser would. And do you think that they'd be okay with people going out and tasing these children? Sorry.
You're good, and I want to give credit where credit's due real quick. It was Brandon who mentioned that.
Sorry, okay, Brandon did.
I think that's not really the point. Dogs are dangerous creatures, but at the same time, this comes down to, again, rights and rights usage. Like as an American, what rights do you have, and what rights, if you use them or if you try to claim them, make you less American? These companies, you have the right to make money, the right to have property that the government deems as yours. Those are two big, very, very, very well defended rights and well acknowledged rights of Americans. But if you protest the notion that, well, individual or group property, a different definition of property, we have a social obligation to this property that exists within a spiritual heritage. That's not really legitimate. Even if you can make some sort of claim, which we have laws for, is viewed as less legitimate. Your right to protest, if you persist in protesting, that's also less legitimate. And at the same time, I think you make an interesting point about how we fit into the Native American population, but I also think that's irrelevant. I think that at a certain point, you're right. We're all humans, and we need to be able to recognize our stakes recognize the stakes that we have as individuals in this sort of pipeline scenario, which is that it might poison large swaths of the Midwest, and B, not have to be directly affected by something or be able to conjure a reason how we're directly affected by something to experience empathy for it. We should all be able to recognize that this pipeline is a bad idea because it's going to leak. It's going to leak into major water supplies. It's going to be transporting, I believe, frac tar sand. So some ungodly pollutant, not just regular oil, of course. It's going to be the tar sand oil that's been fracked, or I don't know, the tears of dead unicorns. So some crazy dangerous material that's going to eventually spill and pollute the land, the water, and all these other issues. And there must be a better way to transport this oil if it's needed at all. So I kind of resist the need for this is an issue that affects us all, and I think that the media, the mainstream media, when they're not ignoring it, is trying to make this a Native American issue, and we need to really start defining this is a human issue. Same with police violence. This is an issue that affects all Americans regardless of race. You shouldn't need to have empathy for Black Americans or Native Americans to understand the stakes that you have in living within a police culture. It's like you shouldn't need to have empathy or sort of Native American heritage to understand your stakes in living in a society that puts profits over clean water. Because certain people.
While I agree with you to an extent there, I do think, so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, when we talk about police violence, we talk about the communities most affected by that, and the community most affected by that, well, one of them is Black men. When we talk about the DAPL, the communities that are going to be most heavily affected in the immediate aftermath are Native American communities. It's going through reservations and ripping up sacred sites, and it's desecrating grave sites. It is something that we have to be able to be empathetic of and realize that, hey, you know what? This is the group that's most affected. Sure, it affects me as well, but I need to be there and stand up for, hey, what you're doing to Native communities is not acceptable. So while I agree that everybody absolutely should be like, hey, you know what? Guess what? We all drink water. You need to be a part of this. You need to pay attention to this. I also think that we do need to give that sort of respect, and I say that because I can't think of a better term right now. Reverence. There we go. I would say, yeah, reverence to the communities that, and their sacred cultural sites. It is incredibly important that we keep that in mind. Now, if it's transporting tar sands, I want to point out that a few years back, there was a tar sand spill in, I want to say, Michigan, and it took forever to clean up. In fact, I don't think it's being cleaned up. It's been finished even yet. But if you really want to look at tar sands damage, look at Alberta, Canada. You go to Alberta, you look up the tar sand spills that have happened in Alberta, you look at the environmental devastation that it's done, and then you come and talk to me about, well, I want the Dakota Access Pipeline. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't want to. People are so high on propaganda, on this idea, this smugness of, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I heard from the company themselves that they're not going to do anything wrong here. It's going to be totally great. And it's just absolute crap. It's absolute crap. People are smug and think they know better, so much so that they're happy to co-sign on the destruction of an important cultural site for a culture that's been actively stamped out in the U.S. by the government before. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind.
I mean, I agree. Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree with recognizing the value, the inherent value in the culture of Native Americans. At the same time, I also fear it becoming this sort of they're standing in the way of progress argument, which people are going to make. That's how you do it. They're just concerned about the spiritual cost of these ethereal, amorphous concerns that we can't put it. Because American society is all about, can I put a dollar value on it? Money is time. Work is time. Work is money. Everything sort of, under a capitalist mode of thinking, everything sort of falls back on, well, how much is this going to cost? And if you can't put a price on, the spirits of your ancestors, if you can't put a price on that, it's hard for people to quantify. It's hard for people to balance that against this pipeline. At the same time, it's very easy for people to balance the idea of, well, drinking, you need to be able to drink water. That's a very real human concern that's, distinct from culture. It's a very human concern that this is distinct from any one group of people. Everyone needs water, unless you might be one of those people who doesn't. I don't like water, and you drink a lot of Coca-Cola, which is you're gonna die. you're gonna die. You're gonna die from that. But ultimately, I'm framing people where they're at, and I think that again, this is not at some point we need to frame this properly. The Native Americans are fighting a battle for everyone.
Right.
They're not just fighting a battle for. I mean, that's my point. They're not just fighting a battle for their right to have, their burial grounds not desecrated. Because we have to be honest. The way the reservations are drawn up, this pipeline is not going to go through a reservation exactly. It's going to come very, very close, and if it spills, it would absolutely spill onto their land. But with reservations are like a lot of post-colonial nations, in that they were drawn up willy-nilly by colonizers, and they don't really reflect any kind of value that the people themselves put on the land. You see the same thing in the Middle East. You see the same thing in South America, where you have ethnic groups that are put in the wrong places because who cares? Because like whatever land is land. And that again, that speaks to the idea that Native American land is very important to Native American culture. Same with Kurdish land. Same with land in South America for South Americans. Same parts of Africa. The land is very important. But this becomes down to like Native Americans are just like the video said. Native Americans are not just fighting for their right to have their own, the spirits of their ancestors not desecrated. I think that's a very reductionist argument. I mean, no one here is making it, but that's how I feel some people are framing it. Like, oh, they just don't want their land disturbed because they're being superstitious. It's like, no, they are literally fighting for everyone's right to water within I would say a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 state radius. Because if this pipeline spills into the Mississippi River, it is going to poison a lot of people.
Yes.
And I think we've seen with Flint, and I think we've seen with parts of Compton, and other sort of fracking pollutants and oil pollutants, that when it comes down to polluted water, if it's going to the wrong neighborhoods, like the poor middle class neighborhoods that just don't have that kind of political power or clout, they just don't care. Yeah. So an oil spill into the Mississippi would affect a lot. I'm not going to even hypothesize. I don't know enough about water geography to say where the Mississippi would, but I would imagine like there are lots of big towns on the Mississippi. There are a lot of big cities.
There's a lot of farms along the Mississippi.
Yeah, so, irrigation systems.
This comes down to framing this correctly, and the Native Americans right now need our support because they are on the front lines of a battle for all of us, and they are they are the canary in the coal mine, like you said. They are trying to prevent a pipeline that has the potential to poison a large swath of American land and water.
I get why you speak of potential. It will. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There will, and there was a comment made by Upstate Raider, who said these companies should be made to engineer safe train cars if they want to transport these toxins. Rail infrastructure can be built so spills are able to be handled. And here's the thing about that. So I don't know enough about railroad construction to say that I'm going to take Upstate Raider at their word that you could build it so it can be handled. But when tar sands and oil spills, it's going to go into the ground. You've got to realize that there's contaminants and other poisons inside of that that's going to damage the area around it and has the possibility to hit an underground reserve of water. A lot of people use things like well systems. But here's the thing about transporting this stuff, especially in a pipeline, and it goes back to fracking or anything else, you can't have a perfectly sealed transportation system. It just is not feasible for what they want, nor would it be cost effective. You would need some kind of true vacuum sealing.
Just how safe
that's
drinking
not
water
gonna
in Los
that's-
Angeles areas?
that's- I mean, exactly. You made the perfect point right there, Adair. Whether you're talking about the rail system in America, which is awful. Let's be honest. American railroads are the worst. We have the worst trains in the Western world. They're slower. They're more dangerous. They're out of, we just don't do big infrastructure projects the way we used to anymore. And our railroads and our roads are the best example of that. But it comes down, it's more effective to do things this way, cost effective, and then, cross your fingers and hope that by the time it spills, it's easier to, you've rigged the system. You've deregulated to the point where you're only responsible for the cleanup and, people who can prove that they've been directly affected by the spill, and that takes years of arbitration and all these other sort of things. And the way the density of tar sands oil works, it's going to sink into the water system. It's not going to just float on top of the ground. It's going to sink down. It's going to pollute large watersheds, well systems. The land's going to be toxic for a long time, and it's going to be one of those oops, who could have predicted this moment? It's like everyone saw it coming. And again, that's one of the more frustrating things about like issues like this. when it does leak, the thing with the Keystone pipeline, if it had been constructed, when it does leak, when it does spill, when these big problems do occur, the people who were proponents or who stayed quiet on it are going to pretend like this is a tragedy. If you can predict it coming, it's not a tragedy. Like, it's a crime. Like, it's criminal negligence. If you can predict the tragedy before it occurs, it is no longer a tragedy, in my opinion. It becomes a crime. It becomes something that, you weighed the cost of preventing it versus the cost of, paying damages, and then you, divided that by the likelihood of leakage over the course of the next 10 years, and you came up with a number that you found one number to be more satisfying than the other number, and that should be a crime.
Absolutely.
That's not a tragedy.
I think something else important to bring out of this is the fact that when we see what these refineries and nuclear energy plants, and when they try to, and methane plants across the country, they aren't building these installations in rich white neighborhoods. They're building these installations in poor neighborhoods, neighborhoods of color, and Indian reservations. That's basically where they're doing this.
Not in my backyard.
We're gonna have to diverge there on the nuclear power plants. I for one am a huge proponent of nuclear energy. I would love to see fusion in our lifetime. It's not likely.
I'm not
be safe.
No, I'm not disagreeing that it can be safe, but I'm saying they still won't put it because of if something did happen, they still won't put it into.
How many big rivers go through them? So nuclear power plants, and for those of you at home, power plants in general have to be built along a water source so that way they can cool whatever whatever byproducts are made. So that's why typically we'll see a nuclear power plant somewhere that's not very habited. In Washington, we have them over on the east, along one of the major rivers. If something does happen, it's an environmental catastrophe. Yes. But that actually has to be built along a dependable water source so that way proper cooling can be done to help avert a major disaster. That's just a little bit of nuclear energy, guys.
Personally, I would like to see us move towards green energy. Nuclear energy was one of those promises of the future, of the 50s and 60s and the 40s that we've implemented very poorly as, part of our lack of desire to, to implement it correctly. I think now it's time that nuclear energy can be something that we flirt with. I think France has done great work with nuclear energy, if I'm not mistaken. France has one of the biggest nuclear energy infrastructure. Germany, but I think that's part of a larger green solution. It's definitely cleaner when implemented properly. Because I think Fukushima that melted down showed us that a lot of these plants, especially in Japan and in the United States, because there was a similar incident in, I want to say, the East Coast, where it turned out that our nuclear plant had been leaking for a while for some issue.
New York, and that was 3 Mile Island.
That was more recently than 3 Mile Island, but yeah. Yeah, we've had issues with nuclear power, but my point is that our nuclear infrastructure is not great. Yes. Industry itself is on corporate welfare because it's not profitable, because we refuse to go, to really, really invest in making it cleaner, more efficient, putting it places. And a lot has to do with the not in my backyard mentality. People don't want nuclear power plants near them, which they're relatively safe. I'd rather a nuclear power plant near me than an oil pipeline.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because oil, I'm gonna get poisoned. Nuclear power plant, I might develop superpowers. No one ever got superpowers from an oil spill.
I want to interject real quick with a comment from Clay Johnson, because I want to get everybody's thoughts on this. And full disclosure again, for those of you who are new, I'm a physics student, so this is something that I'm actually interested in academically. The comment says, nuclear power is a great source. However, it's the same issue with our police. It's a great theory, but has horrible implementation despite good intentions by the majority of involved staff. Now, I think, in my opinion, at least, like we do with police, things like nuclear energy, I think this again ties into the DAPL, because this is a way to move from oil, from that dependency on using it to kind of move forward, and then we don't have to worry about these pipelines and safety and things like that. The thing about it is people don't want to pay the cost of treating nuclear waste. That is the biggest issue that we see facing us, in my opinion, with nuclear energy today, is companies just don't want to pay that cost. I think energy has to be something that we get from the government, that we have actual trained physicists who do this 100% of the time, and I know that their staff, that nuclear energy plants, are staffed by really good people. I had a professor who worked for the government doing, she's an astrophysicist, did a lot of that kind of stuff, and talked about nuclear power plants as, hey, if you get the right people in there and you actually treat the waste, you're good. You can use things like thorium salts. There's a whole myriad of things that we can implement. And I think that nuclear power is not just good in theory. I think it's good in practice once we start regulating and getting people involved that actually want to do that kind of thing. And I think that's the next step in our move towards green energy. I want to know what you guys think.
No, I disagree. I don't. I'm sorry. I guess I'll go first.
I guess you will.
I agree with what Clay has said in that nuclear energy, and as well, there's been a lot of design and implementation problems. There's been a lot of cost-saving measures that we just can't do in every industry. And in those cost-saving measures, there's been a lot of fear-mongering because of events like 3 Mile Island, because of our general fear of nuclear energy is the definition of like science. It's what people think of when they think of science. So it leads to people being afraid of it. A nuclear meltdown of we've yet to in Chernobyl, of course. So it's led to a lot of fear mongering, a lack of desire to want to invest real money in real time nuclear energy. I think that we need to get past that sort of cultural fear of nuclear energy. We're not going to have another Chernobyl. We're not going to really have another Fukushima, especially if we really invest in that kind of technology. At the same time, I don't think we can sustainably run our country because of how big it is, and just the lack of access to water in other places on nuclear energy. I think it's part of either a transitional phase or part of a larger infrastructure of energy that involves wind, solar, geothermal.
Geothermal, I would argue against and say we should stick with solar.
Biofuel, blue algae-based ethanol as opposed to corn-based ethanol, which doesn't work. So we don't buy biofuel, stuff like that. But I just think that it's part of a larger solution. Nuclear power is not going to save us. We need to have a more integrated solution, and part of that is getting rid of the fear of nuclear power.
Right.
Which I think is a big. I think that's a big barrier to why we just can't get enough of it, and why we can't put enough money into researching it, but we can put enough money into somehow propping up the bad parts of it.
Put money into fusion research, but that's a pipe dream.
Yeah. So my view is kind of similar. Actually, it's a little bit of a morphosis of Clay's view and both of your views together. So I agree with Adair in the sense that I think that it can be valuable and it can help us become less dependent on fossil fuels. Where I have a problem with it is the way that it's currently been implemented. And I just think once it's a profit business that's run by corporations and you have, like Brandon said, cost-cutting measures being done, that's where it kind of worries me a little bit. Now, if this was run by a government public utility type program, I could see it being very successful. And there was, certain safety measures that were monitored and that we had to do everything by the book. I think that it could be awesome. Like Adair said, there are people working in those facilities right now that are more than qualified. And as long as they're given the proper resources, nuclear energy can be a very successful thing, could lead us away from fossil fuels, and definitely be a bridge into clean energy altogether, because I think it's somewhere in the middle, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
I think
that needs to be a bridge. I don't think you can sustainably do what we have. So what we have now, right now, is nuclear fission, as opposed to nuclear fusion. Fusion, by the way, for those of you at home, is basically when you get hydrogen ions and you create this kind of plasma. But basically, think the sun, right? That's nuclear fusion. That's what the sun does. It's a pipe dream right now. It's a really interesting theoretical physics course, and they're doing a lot of really good work with that actually in Germany, Brandon. But I do agree that nuclear needs to be a transitional step or part of a bigger portfolio, though I definitely would not say we need to do geothermal. I would not sign on that.
But I don't disagree. I just threw geothermal out there. I'm not a big fan of geothermal energy. I am a big proponent of blue algae based biofuels though. I do think that blue algae is the way to go if we're gonna go with ethanol based biofuels, because corn does not work pretty much at all, which we've learned. Although we still give corn subsidies for ethanol, even though it doesn't, the science has proven that it's not the way to go. But I think this, so we talked about the government ensuring energy, and I think that's, it comes back to our fundamental rights. Do we have a right? Is it a human right to have access to, energy, access to water, access to, clean air, clean food? And that this struggle that we're having in America right now with defining what rights humans deserve, and then secondary, what right, like who gets to be a human and who gets deserving of those rights. I think we can all agree that when it comes down to clean water and clean air, that we believe that certain communities should have that stuff. I think we can all agree that if there was an oil spill in Beverly Hills or some other rich neighborhood, that it would be a travesty, an injustice. But we look towards Flint and certain parts of Illinois, and it's just okay to pollute there. Like that's just it's environmental racism. But this dual-sided question, or this dual-pronged question of what are the rights that humans deserve, and moving that sort of the human rights question into the 21st century, as opposed to going back toward this sort of minute life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Like we need to really lay out, like, well, as a human living in the United States of America, regardless of whether or not you're a citizen or a Native American or black, brown, or the other, like, you deserve water, you deserve internet access, housing, a certain minimum wage, a living wage. These questions of what society should provide us, as opposed to treating it as though it's a competition with one another. I think right now we're balancing human rights, the right to water, the rights to access, the rights to have a coherent culture, with the profit margin of a company. I don't think anyone is saying that this is going to reduce the cost of gas prices, the cost of oil, or anything for the average American. This is all about one business versus the American people, and how we can make that an obvious choice for our government. Where it shouldn't be up in the air whether a corporation should be allowed to theoretically pollute like riverbeds.
Right.
Yeah. So sorry. You guys just blow me away sometimes. I mean, I'm talking to a physicist and a PhD candidate, and here I am, Joe Schmo, just sitting behind a laptop. Anyway, so Adair, refresh my memory. What is the techniques, nuclear energy wise, just because I'm curious, and I've been trying to, ever since we started this part of the conversation, where it's almost similar to distilling water in a sense. Obviously there's added steps. Does that ring any bells? Am I just completely out of my realm?
Water is used to cool down the material used for fission, if my memory serves correctly. And I actually have a friend who I think we might actually need to bring on for something like this, who is a physicist who works for a nuclear power plant. She's quite good at her job. But so water is always going to be used in power plants to cool down whatever materials are being done. It needs to be done. One of the ways you create electricity, folks at home, is you rotate a magnet in an electrical field, a magnet in a magnetic field. That's what we're talking. Magnet in a magnetic field, and that gives off electricity. So what oftentimes we have happen in America is we have coal burning electrical plants. You toss the coal into a fire. That fire heats water. That water then turns to steam. That steam then is forced down a pipe, and that spins this really gigantic magnet in a magnetic field, and that is how we get electricity. Well, that steam has to go somewhere. It has to cool down. So that's why you see those gigantic stacks with what looks like smoke coming out of them every time you drive by a power plant. That's steam. That's typically in coal burning plants, the end result. That's steam, that's CO2, that's all that other fun BS that you get. In a nuclear plant, water is going to be used to cool down whatever radioactive material is there 9 times out of 10, and that's, to my limited knowledge, I'm not yet a PhD candidate, Brandon. Hopefully I will be one day. But anyway.
Well, I mean, let's transition.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I would say, well, I think it's worth mentioning that this kind of displacement of indigenous peoples in order to, build these energy infrastructures to enrich corporations, this is a global problem. This is a problem that we see In Africa, when they build these transnational parks, they have a lot of, especially in South Africa, along the borders of South Africa and its adjacent countries, they build, they build these walled-in transnational safari parks that are tourist attractions, and they, prevent nomadic people from moving in between, like along their traditional nomadic path. You see it with, dammed rivers and the creation of dams in South America. This is a sort of, and the UN has a commission on this. So the Commission on Indigenous Rights, the people who speak to the rights of the indigenous people as it comes to land management and land usage. And so there's a very long trend, a global trend, in sort of encroaching on the land, continually, encroaching on the land and taking the land away from indigenous people to suit the needs of whatever the fancy of the modern state is.
Right. Well,
I have a question. Why do you think this pipeline is getting so much less attention than the Keystone Pipeline? Do you think it's just because of everyone got worked up over the Keystone Pipeline and they just worked themselves out, and then once it was over, that was no longer, they were just unprepared for another pipeline issue, or is it something else?
I think it's a combination of multiple things. I think that does play a role in it, Brandon. The fact that people kind of see, there was people who got excited about it in terms of wanting to stand up against it, and now they see this again, and it's kind of old news to them. It doesn't seem as important to them anymore. And then there's also the fact that the Keystone Pipeline crossed international borders, and I think that might have brought more attention to it in a global aspect. And so that may have been part of why we're seeing a difference in the reactions. What do you think, Adair?
I also think it's a combination of issues. I think that you do have this kind of pipeline fatigue, if that's what we want to call it. But I also want to point out that the Keystone XL pipeline was painted as an American issue in the media. It was painted as, well, this is going to affect America's heartland, and by America's heartland, read white farmers. That's who the face of the Keystone XL pipeline was the majority white farmers in the Midwest, in that kind of what's commonly referred to by those of us on the coast as flyover country. This is not being painted as a severe environmental threat to more than just Native Americans. This, as you've said, is being painted as a singular issue for just Native Americans. And essentially, the media outlets are not covering it. So when mainstream media doesn't cover something, it doesn't tend to get as much play. Not as many people are going to hear about it. The baby boomer generation is typically not going to hear about stuff like this. You're going to see a lot of millennials talking about it, getting on about it, because it's blowing up on social media. But there's only so much that we can do to influence mainstream media to cover it. But also, I think it's racism. Plain and simple. It's being painted by mainstream media as a single person's issue, and that's Native people.
Well, let me just interject here, guys. We're getting down on a little bit of time here at the end of the hour. We're going to be coming up to the Benjamin Dixon Show. So if you're joining us, you're watching Project Cnty. And we've been talking about the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and just to interject, this is not only just a local issue, and it is definitely a brown person issue, but it's a global brown person issue. This, we're getting these garbage tar sands from Canada because we don't have any more good oil here, except they're finding all this gas, of course, and Oklahoma's loving that. And we're transporting that crap. But ultimately, there's pipelines going through these countries we're invading around the world and setting up our bases around the world. And we have a serious oil problem in the sense that the governments know it's running out. We've hit peak oil, or we're going to hit it very soon, and Europe needs oil, and Europe doesn't want to get it from Russia. So this is what this is all about. This has gone back to Zbigniew Brzezinski and Carter. This is the Carter Doctrine spread out and on steroids. And the wars that we're talking about overseas, the Dakota Access Pipeline, Flint, Watts, everywhere where the water is being poisoned, it's all connected. It all has to do with oil. the wars coming up are all about oil and control of that resource. And we didn't really talk about it much, but we're getting our yearly dose of propaganda over 9/11. 15 Septembers later, getting the main, the narrative that was put out by the government and rubber stamped by everybody else, and no crime was investigated, and here we are. The oil companies, Halliburton, making money, the traders making money, and the military-industrial complex making money. And we're going to get into more about that on Sunday at some point, a deep dive into some 9/11 stuff, new information, and the physics. Adair, we're going to talk about the physics.
Absolutely, and I just want to bridge those two things. I think is important. We're so afraid of terrorism,
right?
As this amorphous thing, as though you can somehow fight terrorism. You can't fight terrorism with fire. You can't fight fire with fire in this way, especially. But we that's such an amorphous threat that cannot be solved. Not this way, definitely. But we've ignored one of the big causes of terrorism, which is the displacement of people, such as this kind of issue, and also the dramatic changes to the climate that more tar sand oil is going to cause. One of the big causes of the Syrian civil war was drought.
Absolutely,
it was drought.
Number one cause. It forced all the people into Damascus, into the towns and the cities.
Absolutely, and it becomes hard for us to understand as a society that is more capitalist. These kind of more we give a lot of sort of clout to this idea of human agency, and like these humans are making decisions and these conflicts, and we define everything as sort of ethnic issues, like they're just barbaric and they're Muslim, but no, it's water. It's water. It's the climate is causing drought, which causes people to fight over issues that are important to them, but would normally not be important enough to fight unless there were limited resources.
Well, Israel, same thing. It's about water. It's brown people on our resources. What are they doing there? That's what we should talk about.
Because I am. It's against. Well, the people tend to react the same for various things, and the lack of resources causes infighting amongst ethnic groups,
right?
And it always will.
Always.
But when it comes down to this pipeline, again, this is not even being framed by the mainstream media as an environmental issue. This is being framed by them as an ethnic issue.
Right.
This is an issue. This is
a criminal issue.
Yeah. We are 3 steps removed now from the money. It's not it's not it's cultural, not environmental. It's environmental, not money. And ultimately, the money is what is causing this destruction of the environment, and it's being framed as this cultural issue that is in order to make it more abstract, so people can sort of brush it away. When ultimately you have the environment being placed against the profit margin of a private company that is willing to poison large groups of people, not only native people, but just
it's everybody. It's poor people.
Chicago and St. Louis dwelling blacks and poor whites. Again, it is what it is. We have to cut through the sort of narrative that this is an ethnic issue, and further cut through the narrative that this is somehow unrelated to the profits of a private corporation as being the most moral thing our society can ensure. That's the mythology of Reaganism,
right?
Ensuring the neoliberal mythology, ensuring the profit of a private company over the well-being of private citizens is the most moral thing a free government can do, even at the expense of clean drinking water. This is not an ethnic issue. This is not a religious issue. This is a very, very clear access to basic human needs issue.
And for more on that, come check out our show on Sunday, because we've got about 2 minutes left, Brandon. So we got
to wrap it up here. Who wants to take the lead out here, guys? We're going to wrap things up. Great discussion today. Great interview. We're going to do it sometime on Sunday for a couple hours and really get into a discussion about, we were having one before the show, but you're all watching Project Sanity, projectsanity.org. We're on the Benjamin Dixon Network, and we're going to be turning that over to Benjamin in a couple of minutes here, in about 1.5 minutes. So closing thoughts, guys, before we close out.
Check out our Bits of Sanity coming soon, guys. You don't even know what it is, but you'll learn.
You'll learn tonight.
Damn it. Brandon's like, we got to get these bits of... Brandon's become an executive producer all of a sudden. Now that he's a doctor, he's all
not
cocky.
a doctor. My goal in being a doctor is just for one day for someone to have a heart attack and they go, they're a doctor, and I go, yeah, and they go like, well, what kind? The kind that when you hear what kind, you're gonna go, ugh.
We all die, man. That's oh, you're a philosophical doctor. Okay, yeah, cool. All right, guys.
Doctor.
Great show, everybody. Thanks for watching. Tune in next week live. You can follow me at Our Revolution TV. You guys?
EM Project Sanity at
capital ADAIR, capital SCHMIDT, capital PS.
And Brandon's ABS_opinion.
Yeah, great names, guys. It's like hashtag / HTTP. Anyway, all right. Love you guys. We're gonna have a great time on Sunday. Thanks for joining in and watching Project Sanity. We'll see you all next week, and whenever we do our Pits of Sanity, and we're gonna have a regular live program at some point. So subscribe to the channel. Peace.